The sharp metallic clack of handcuffs was cold against my wrists, but the betrayal cut far deeper. Smoke still stung my eyes from the chemical fire 6 years ago, filling my lungs with the acrid stench of burning sulfur and ozone. Sirens wailed in the distance, their red and blue lights flashing rhythmically against the rain-slicked pavement. Blood dripped from my scraped knee, warm and sticky against the freezing Seattle air. My father, Arthur Ross, leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mint. He squeezed my shoulder, not to comfort me, but to keep me pinned in place. "Say you loaded the wrong valve, Elena," he whispered, his tone flat, devoid of warmth. "Take the deal, or you will never see your newborn boys again." That was the precise moment my entire life shattered into jagged pieces, sending me down a dark spiral that began long before I stepped into the grand, silent halls of the Vance estate. The rain in Seattle never really stops. It just hangs in the air like a wet, gray sheet. For 6 long years after that tragic night, my life moved in a quiet, painful blur. I worked as an assistant at a small community pharmacy on the outskirts of the city. The air in the shop always smelled of rubbing alcohol, dusty cardboard boxes, and cheap paper cups. My days were filled with the endless clatter of plastic pill bottles and the mechanical hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Every single day was a battle against an invisible wall. The world looked at me and saw a felon. They saw a disgraced woman who had taken a plea deal for criminal medical negligence. Customers would glance at the faded name tag pinned to my faded blue scrubs, Elena Ross, and quickly avert their eyes. Some would pull their purses a little tighter. Others would step back, as if my past were an infectious disease. I swallowed the humiliation. I swallowed the silence. I lived in a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment where the radiator hissed like an angry snake all night. My only motivation to keep breathing was Leo, my 6-year-old son. He had soft eyes and a quiet smile that could light up the darkest room. But every time I held him, a sharp ache tore through my chest. I knew somewhere out there, my second twin boy was missing. My father had claimed the child died at birth, but my motherly instinct screamed that it was a lie. I was trapped in a cage of debt, guilt, and relentless gaslighting. Then came the rainy Tuesday that changed everything. The heavy mahogany door of my father's office slammed shut, sealing us in a room that smelled of old leather and expensive scotch. Arthur Ross stood behind his polished desk, his graying hair combed back neatly. He didn't look at me like a father looking at his daughter. He looked at me like a landlord inspecting a piece of damaged property. "The financial auditors are stepping in, Elena," Arthur said, pacing slowly across the Persian rug. "Ross Financial is on the brink of bankruptcy, and you are going to fix it." "I don't have money, Dad," I replied, my voice raspy. My hands trembled inside the pockets of my worn cardigan. "You took my career. You took my reputation. What else could you possibly take from me?" Arthur smiled, a cold, calculated curve of his lips. He tossed a thick, leather-bound folder onto the desk. The heavy thump echoed off the wood. "Damian Vance," Arthur stated plainly, CEO of Vance Pharma. 3 months ago, a mysterious neurological collapse left him completely comatose. He is a breathing corpse in a gilded cage. I stared at the document. What does a comatose billionaire have to do with me? His family needs a legal conservator, a wife who will sign over his voting shares to an aligned board, Arthur explained, his eyes narrowing. "I have arranged a conservatorship marriage. You will marry Damian Vance. You will move into his mansion. You will sign the documents I give you." "No," I whispered, stepping back. "I am not a pawn for your corporate games." Arthur leaned over the desk, his shadow falling heavily over me. "Do you want to know where your second son is, Elena? Do you want his address?" Because if you walk out that door, I will make sure that boy disappears off the face of the earth forever. The air left my lungs in a sharp gasp. The room seemed to spin. My heart hammered violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. He was using my own blood against me, leveraging my deepest agony for a corporate takeover. I had no leverage. I had no power. But looking at the cold cruelty in my father's eyes, something inside me broke, and something new, sharp, and resilient snapped into place. 2 days later, the ink dried on the legal papers. There was no wedding dress. There were no flowers. There was only the scratch of a fountain pen on heavy parchment paper. The Vance estate sat on a lonely cliff overlooking the dark, churning waters of Puget Sound. Heavy iron gates swung open with a rusty groan, allowing the black town car to roll up the long, winding driveway. Towering pine trees blocked out the sun, casting long, menacing shadows across the stone facade. When I stepped into the grand foyer, the air hit me like an ice cube against skin. It smelled of expensive marble cleaner, stale lilies, and an underlying scent of antiseptic. The floor was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the cold crystal chandelier above. High walls absorbed every sound, turning footsteps into hollow echoes. A strict housekeeper led me up a sweeping curved staircase, down a dimly lit hallway, and pushed open a set of double oak doors. "This is your husband's quarters, Mrs. Vance," she said coldly, her tone making it clear I was an unwanted intruder. "Do not disturb the medical staff." She closed the door behind me with a quiet click, leaving me alone in the vast, shadowed room. The room was filled with the rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat of modern medicine. Beep, hiss, beep, hiss. A wall of monitors glowed with pale green lines. In the center of the massive king-sized bed lay Damien Vance. He was stunningly handsome, yet painfully hollowed out. His jawline was sharp, his pale skin almost translucent under the dim lights. A thick, dark lock of hair fell over his forehead. His long fingers rested motionless on the white silk sheets. To the world, he was a tragic vegetable, a broken titan of industry. I stepped closer, the soft carpet muffling my shoes. The sharp tang of intravenous fluids filled my nostrils. I looked down at his still face, then turned my eyes to the heart rate monitor beside his bed. My training as a pharmacy assistant and my years of self-study in chemistry kicked in instantly. I leaned over the digital screen. The green line spiked rhythmically, but the pupil response readings and micromuscle tremors displayed on the auxiliary diagnostic board were wrong. A true coma patient's neurological feedback curves downwards in a flat, smooth wave. Damien's feedback loops were jagged, his heart rate slightly elevated every time the door opened. His fingers had microspasms that matched conscious stress responses. He wasn't in a coma. He was trapped inside his own body. Or worse, he was hiding. I stood by the side of the bed, feeling the cold mountain air seep through the glass window panes. The smell of rain, sterile saline, and heavy oak filled the room. For 6 years, I had let the world crush me. I had let my father dictate my reality. I had played the silent victim, hiding in the dark, waiting for someone to save me. No one was coming to save me. I had to save myself. I reached out and touched the cold edge of the mahogany bedpost. My fingers gripped the wood until my knuckles turned white. "I will not be a victim for one more day," I whispered into the quiet room, my voice steady and sharp against the steady hum of the machines. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing me inside the room with a man who was supposed to be a hollow shell. The air was thick with the sharp smell of rubbing alcohol, copper, and lavender oil. Soft green lights from the medical monitors flickered on the wall, casting long, dancing shadows across the mahogany furniture. The rhythmic pulse of the heart monitor echoed like a quiet clock. Beep, beep, beep. I stepped closer to the massive bed. Damien Vance lay perfectly still under dark silk sheets. His face was sharp, pale, and regal. A faint shadow of dark stubble lined his jawline. His chest rose and fell with slow, mechanical precision. To the rest of the world, he was a fallen titan, a helpless billionaire controlled by corporate vultures. But my eyes did not see a victim. My years of analyzing diagnostic data in quiet pharmacy backrooms told me a completely different story. I leaned over the bed, my shadow falling across his chest. The faint, warm scent of cedarwood and sandalwood drifted up from his collar. I pulled a small pen light from my pocket and clicked it on. The bright beam flashed across his left eye. His pupil contracted instantly. Micro-muscles around his jaw twitched. A subtle spike fluttered across the neurological monitor beside his head. His heart rate jumped from 62 to 78 beats per minute. A cold smile touched my lips. "You are a very good actor, Mr. Vance," I whispered, my voice barely louder than the hum of the air purifier. No response. His face remained a mask of marble. "I know what a real coma looks like," I continued, pacing slowly around the foot of the bed. The soles of my shoes sank silently into the thick Persian rug. A coma patient does not hold muscle tension in his shoulders when a door opens. A coma patient does not have localized microspasms in his right index finger when his heart rate spikes. You are awake. You are trapped inside, or you are hiding. Damien remained motionless, but the line on the cardiac monitor twitched again. I leaned down until my face was inches from his ear. I could feel the faint warmth of his breath against my cheek. I pulled out a small glass vial of synthetic ammonia from my cardigan pocket, a trick I had learned during my night studies in advanced chemistry. I unstoppered it, letting the sharp, biting odor fill the space between us. "My father brought me here to sign away your company," I said, my voice cutting sharply through the silence. "He thinks I am his obedient little pawn. He thinks I will play the quiet, grieving caretaker while he steals your empire. But I have my own battles to fight, and I do not play for my father." I set the open vial on the nightstand, right beside his pillow. The acrid vapor hit his nostrils. A tiny tremor ran down his neck. His knuckles turned white against the silk sheet. I leaned closer, my lips almost touching his earlobe. "If you do not wake up and start fighting your own war, Damien, I will give the press exactly what they want. I will call a media conference tomorrow morning. I will stand in front of every camera in Seattle, and I will strip off your sheets live on air to demonstrate your muscle reflexes. I will ruin your little tragic performance." A sharp, audible gasp broke through the room. Damien's eyes snapped open. They were a piercing, stormy gray, sharp as shattered glass, and filled with raw, icy fury. His hand shot up from the bed like a striking cobra. His long, cold fingers clamped around my wrist with incredible force. The air in his lungs rushed out in a harsh, raspy breath that smelled of stale saline and mint. "Who the hell are you?" he rasped. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping against metal, unused for 3 long months. I did not pull away. Pain shot up my arm from his grip, but I stared straight into his stormy eyes without flinching. For 6 years, I had let men intimidate me. I had let my father bend my knee. Not anymore. "I am your new wife," I replied, my voice steady, smooth, and cold as steel. "And your only ally in this house." Damien glared at me, his chest heaving as he fought the weakness in his muscles. His eyes scanned my face, searching for fear, searching for deceit. He found neither. Slowly, his fingers loosened around my wrist, leaving red marks on my pale skin. He fell back onto the pillows, exhausted by the sudden surge of adrenaline, but his eyes never left mine. "My cousin, Julian," Damien whispered, his throat working hard to form the words. "He is the one poisoning the 4 lines." "I know," I said calmly, pulling a pair of sterile gloves from my coat pocket. "I smelled the organophosphate traces in your saline bag the moment I walked in. I will swap the bags tonight, but if we are going to survive this, you need to follow my lead." Over the next 2 weeks, the dynamic inside the Vance mansion shifted in quiet, invisible ways. During the day, I maintained my cover. I wore simple, dark dresses and kept my head low in front of the housekeepers and corporate lawyers. I let Julian Vance talk down to me in the hallways. I swallowed their arrogant comments, letting them believe I was just a broken girl with a criminal record, completely out of her depth. But at night, when the mansion fell silent, my real work began. I spent hours sitting at the heavy mahogany desk in my quarters, studying under the harsh glow of a desk lamp. The room smelled of old paper, ink, and midnight coffee. I buried myself in advanced pharmacology textbooks, updating my knowledge on biotoxins and synthetic antidotes. I mapped out the exact chemical structure of the poison Julian was using. I began taking online courses to recertify my toxicology credentials. I started eating clean, taking long walks in the rainy gardens to rebuild my physical strength, and standing taller with every passing day. I was no longer hiding behind my past. I was building armor. Meanwhile, miles away in downtown Seattle, 2 young boys were about to cross paths. Leo sat at a wooden table in the central branch of the Seattle Public Library. The air was quiet, smelling of dust and old books. He was flipping through an illustrated science encyclopedia, his small fingers tracing the diagrams. A few feet away, another boy in a tailored navy blazer and clean leather shoes pulled the exact same encyclopedia from a shelf. The boy turned around and froze. Leo looked up from his book. The 2 6-year-olds stared at each other across the quiet aisle. Their faces were identical. They had the same soft, dark hair, the same shape of the nose, and the exact same sharp, observant hazel eyes. Tobias Vance dropped his book. It hit the carpeted floor with a dull, heavy thud. Leo blinked, his mouth dropping open. "Are you me?" Tobias stepped closer, examining Leo's worn denim jacket and scuffed sneakers, then looking at his own high-end clothes. A clever, wicked spark lit up in Tobias's eyes, a look that belonged entirely to a boy who had spent his life trapped in a cold mansion, waiting for an adventure. "No," Tobias whispered, a small smile breaking across his face. "I think we are something much better." Warm maple syrup and brewed coffee filled the sunlit breakfast nook of the Vance mansion. Pale morning light filtered through heavy velvet curtains. Damien sat in a high-backed wheelchair by the mahogany table. His legs were covered in cashmere, but his gray eyes were bright and intensely alive. Across the table, Julian Vance adjusted his silk tie, pouring orange juice with smooth grace. "You look well, cousin," Julian said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "The medical team is amazed by your sudden progress." "My wife takes exceptional care of me," Damien replied, his deep voice laced with quiet authority. Julian's eyes flicked to me as I entered. I wore a tailored cream blazer, my dark hair pinned back. I was no longer a nervous pharmacy assistant. My posture was straight. My stride was confident. The click of my heels against the hardwood floor sounded like a slow countdown. "She is devoted," Julian sneered softly, "though the board is restless. A bedridden CEO and a wife with a criminal record do not inspire confidence." Before Damien answered, cheerful clatter echoed from the hallway. Leo and Tobias burst into the room in identical dark blue school uniforms. To the world, Leo was a visiting nephew. Tobias was the heir. But behind closed doors, the twin boys had forged a secret alliance. They spent evenings trading clothes, practicing voices, and running covert reconnaissance around the estate. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, Mom," Tobias shouted, sliding onto a chair next to Damien. Leo darted to the opposite side, grabbing a warm waffle. "Uncle Julian, you look serious today. Did you lose another board vote?" Leo asked innocently, his hazel eyes wide. Julian's face darkened. "Watch your tongue, boy." Tobias giggled, bumping his shoulder against Damien's arm. "Dad, physical therapy is at 10. Mom said if you finish your leg lifts, we can go to the marine park. You promised." Damien looked down at Tobias, a genuine smile softening his sharp features. He ruffled the boy's hair. "I keep my promises." He glanced up at me, his gaze lingering. "Your mother makes sure of it." Under the table, the boys shared a secret grin. Their playful chaos was a calculated distraction. While Julian scowled at Leo, Tobias slipped a USB drive into my pocket, one the boys pulled from Julian's briefcase. 3 hours later, the main auditorium of Vance Pharma was suffocating. The room smelled of floor wax and expensive cologne. High-definition screens lined the front wall, displaying financial charts. Board members sat in leather seats, their murmurs creating a low hum. Julian stood behind the central podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced into the microphone, "we must choose the future of this company. Damien Vance is incapacitated. Worse, his legally appointed conservator, Elena Ross, is unfit to hold authority." A collective murmur swept through the room. Julian pressed a button. The LED screen flickered to life, displaying a dark genetic chart flashing red warnings. "This official forensic DNA report pulled from the cloud proves Tobias Vance has zero genetic link to Elena Ross," Julian declared, pointing a laser at the screen. "Her claims of being a certified toxicologist are fraudulent. Her past shows chemical tampering. She is an imposter." Gasps filled the hall as camera flashes popped. I stood near the back, flanked by security guards. My heart pounded, but I did not panic. 6 years ago, I would have bowed my head. Today, I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. "That report is a digital forgery. Julian," I said loudly, my voice cutting through the noise like a silver blade. Julian smirked. "The cloud data does not lie, Elena. The code is encrypted." "The code was modified 48 hours ago," I countered, connecting my silver laptop to the stage's feed. I hit enter. The red chart vanished. Lines of raw system code scrolled down the screen. I stood beside Julian, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The air smelled of hot electronics and ozone. As a biomedical toxicologist, I specialize in data encryption. I explained clearly, "This is not a genetic mismatch. It is a Trojan virus inserted into the Vance Pharma server on Tuesday. The IP traces directly to a laptop in this building." I clicked the final prompt. The screen displayed a log file. Julian Vance's digital signature appeared in bright blue letters beside the altered files. The board members gasped. Julian's face was drained of color. "You hacked the server?" Julian stuttered. "I restored the original uncorrupted file," I said coldly. "The real genetic sequencing confirms Tobias and Leo are twin brothers, and their biological mother is me." Before Julian could speak, the doors swung open. Damien Vance walked into the room. He stood tall in a sharp charcoal suit, leaning slightly on a dark cane. His powerful presence commanded the room. He walked down the center aisle, his dark shoes striking the floor with rhythmic force. He stopped beside me, placing his hand over mine on the podium. The warm scent of his cedarwood cologne wrapped around me like a shield. "The board meeting is adjourned," Damien announced, his voice booming. "Julian Vance is relieved of all executive duties, effective immediately." The crowd erupted into chaos as reporters rushed forward. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently. I pulled it out. The screen flashed with an urgent alert from the mansion's monitoring system. My stomach dropped into a cold abyss. The text message read, "Emergency. Patient Leo Ross has collapsed. Acute neurological toxicity detected. Respiratory failure imminent." My phone slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a snap. Leo had been poisoned. The room spun around me as the scent of panic filled my lungs. Damien caught me by the waist before my knees touched the ground. His gray eyes burned with fierce determination. "He is our son, Elena," Damien growled softly near my ear. "We are going to save him." The monitor in the ICU screeched with a continuous, piercing alarm. Beep, 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 beep. Red warning lights flashed against the glass walls, casting a bloody glare over my son's pale face. Leo lay motionless beneath thin, white sheets. Oxygen hissed through a plastic mask strapped to his face. His small chest rose in rapid, shallow spasms. Blue shadows bruised the delicate skin under his closed eyes. The air inside the room smelled of cold antiseptic, rubbing alcohol, and raw fear. His oxygen saturation is dropping below 70%. The head doctor yelled over the noise of the pumps. "The neurotoxin is paralyzing his diaphragm." I grabbed the diagnostic printout with trembling hands. My eyes scanned the complex chemical equations. The toxin was a synthetic organophosphate variant. It bonded tightly to neural receptors, shutting down muscle transmission minute by minute. "Standard atropine won't break this molecular bond." I gasped, my voice raw. "We need a natural enzyme inhibitor. The silverwood alpine flora. Its active compound is the only agent capable of breaking this specific synthetic chain." Damien stepped beside me. He wore a dark wool coat. His jaw was set like forged iron. "Where is it found?" "Mount Silverwood," I replied, pointing at the botanical database on the screen. "On the North Ridge, 6,000 feet up. But a blizzard warning was issued an hour ago. No medical transport helicopter will fly into that storm." Damien did not hesitate for a single second. He pulled his leather gloves tight over his hands. "Then I will go get it." "Damien, no." I grabbed his arm, feeling the rock-hard tension in his muscle. "Your leg nerves are still recovering. You can barely walk without a cane. The cold will freeze your joint tissue." He turned and gripped my shoulders. His gray eyes burned with a fire I had never seen before. "6 years ago, I wasn't there to protect you or our boys," he said, his voice deep and unwavering against the blaring alarms. "I am not failing him today. Stay here. Prepare the lab. Have the centrifuge ready." Before I could reply, he turned and marched down the hallway. The sharp thud of his heavy winter boots echoed against the linoleum floor. 2 hours later, Mount Silverwood was a howling hell of white powder and ice. The wind roared like a jet engine, whipping snow across the razor-sharp rocks. Temperatures plunged far below zero. The air smelled of frozen pine needles, crushed granite, and biting frost. Damien pushed forward through knee-deep drifts. Every step sent sharp, electric needles of pain up his recovering legs. His muscles screamed with exhaustion. His breath came out in ragged, white plumes. Beside him, 2 mountain rescue guides fought against the gale, their headlamps cutting narrow beams through the blinding whiteout. "Mr. Vance, we have to turn back," the lead guide shouted through his radio. "The upper slope is unstable. An avalanche is imminent. Not without the plant." Damien roared back, his teeth grinding against the freezing wind. He scrambled up a steep rock face. His fingernails dug into the icy granite through his gloves. Blood seeped through his thermals where sharp ice cut his knees, but he ignored the sting. High up in a narrow rock crevice, illuminated by his headlamp, grew a small cluster of pale blue flowers. The silverwood flora. Frozen. Pristine. Damien reached out. His fingers trembled with frostbite as he carefully sliced the stems with a sterile titanium scalpel. He sealed the precious blue petals inside a heated, insulated thermal flask. Suddenly, a deep, guttural groan vibrated through the mountain beneath his boots. Crack! A massive sheet of ice snapped loose 500 feet above him. Thousands of tons of white powder surged down the slope like a roaring tidal wave. Avalanche! Run! The guide screamed. Damien jammed the thermal flask into his chest pocket, zipped his heavy parka shut, and threw himself sideways off the rock ledge onto the lower tree line just as a wall of roaring snow swept over the cliff, burying the path behind him in complete darkness. Back at the Vance Pharma Central Research Laboratory, the clock on the wall read 2:15 a.m. The air smelled of liquid nitrogen, ethanol, and hot electronic circuitry. The hum of industrial centrifuges vibrated through the floorboards. Sweat dripped down my forehead, stinging my bloodshot eyes. I had been standing at the lab bench for 12 straight hours. My hands were steady, locked in absolute focus. The heavy, reinforced doors slammed open. Damien stood in the doorway. He was covered in melted snow, his face pale, his lips blue from hypothermia. Blood stained the knees of his torn winter trousers. But in his right hand, he held the heated thermal flask. He didn't say a word. He walked across the room with a heavy limp and placed the flask gently on my stainless steel workbench. "Save our boy," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the freezing air. I popped the vacuum seal. The fresh, sharp fragrance of winter pine and crushed petals filled the sterile laboratory. "Starting extraction now," I said, my voice cold, precise, and devoid of fear. For 6 more agonizing hours, I worked without stopping. I crushed the blue petals under liquid nitrogen. I pipetted the liquid extract into a mass spectrometer, isolating the pure active enzyme. I titrated the solution with a saline buffer, monitoring the molecular weight down to the microgram. My fingers flew over test tubes, micropipettes, and digital scales. I was no longer just a mother. I was a scientist fighting death itself. At 8:30 a.m., the gold-tinted liquid was drawn into a sterile glass syringe. The custom bioantidote was complete. I ran into the ICU room. Damien followed close behind, holding my waist to keep me upright. I pushed the liquid directly into Leo's foreline. For 30 excruciating seconds, nothing happened. The heart monitor continued its slow, weak pulse. Beep, beep. Then, the digital line spiked. Leo's body trembled. A deep, clear gasp tore from his chest. The blue tint around his lips faded into a soft pink blush. His oxygen saturation numbers climbed steadily on the screen. 80, 85, 94, 98%. The chaotic brainwave readings smoothed out into a stable, healthy rhythm. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed from the outer corridor. The double doors of the hospital lobby blew open with a loud bang. A dozen armed federal agents in navy blue jackets with bold gold letters, FBI, flooded the hallway. At the front of the lobby stood Julian Vance and my father, Arthur Ross. They were dressed in trench coats, carrying heavy leather duffel bags packed with bearer bonds, stolen research drives, and fake passports. Samantha Sterling stood beside them, her face pale with terror. Julian Vance, Arthur Ross, an FBI special agent barked, raising a sidearm. "Stay where you are. Hands where we can see them." Julian tried to bolt toward the side exit, but 2 federal agents tackled him to the marble floor, slamming his face into the polished tile. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed loudly through the lobby. Arthur Ross turned toward me, his eyes wide with desperate panic. "Elena, tell them it's a mistake," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I'm your father. Damien stepped in front of me, his tall frame blocking Arthur completely. A senior FBI investigator walked forward, holding a thick sealed file. Arthur Ross, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, human trafficking, and corporate sabotage, the agent read aloud. 6 years ago, you fabricated a child mortality record and illegally sold your infant grandson, Tobias, to Samantha Sterling for $3 million to pay off your corporate debts. The truth exploded through the room like a thunderclap. The night, 6 years ago at the Grand Regent Hotel, was never an accident. Julian had laced Damien's drink with an experimental neurotoxin, while Arthur had trapped Elena in the same suite to steal Vance's pharma research files. In the dark chaos, Damien and Elena had found each other. Tobias had never died. He had been sold as a pawn to secure a fake heir for the Vance fortune. Take them away, Damien said coldly. The agents dragged Julian and Arthur out into the glaring morning light. Outside, red and blue strobe lights flashed against the glass windows, surrounded by screaming news reporters and rolling cameras. The villains who had ruined 6 years of our lives were finally going down in shame. Inside the quiet ICU, the morning sun broke through the storm clouds, casting a golden light across the room. The soft hum of the heart monitor was steady and peaceful. Leo's long eyelashes fluttered. His hazel eyes slowly opened. He looked up at the ceiling, then turned his head toward the side of the bed. He saw me. He saw Damien holding my hand. A small, beautiful smile touched Leo's lips. His weak voice was sweet and clear. "Mommy, Dad, you saved me." Tears spilled over my cheeks, hot and fast, washing away 6 years of pain, guilt, and isolation. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I didn't feel helpless. I fell into Damien's arms, resting my head against his chest. His strong arms wrapped tightly around me, holding our sons close. The warm golden light of a late afternoon sun poured over the coastal cliff of Malibu. A gentle breeze blew in from the Pacific Ocean, carrying the crisp, salty scent of sea spray, wild sage, and blooming jasmine. The rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the rocks below sounded like a peaceful lullaby. I stood on a wide wooden deck, my feet bare against smooth cedar planks. I wore a simple, elegant emerald green silk dress that rustled softly in the wind. My dark hair fell loosely over my shoulders. I was no longer wearing the muted gray cardigans of a timid pharmacy assistant, nor the rigid blazers of a defensive scientist. I looked in the mirror before stepping outside and saw a woman who was confident and at peace. 1 year had passed since the storm at Mount Silverwood and the arrest of Arthur Ross and Julian Vance. In that year, I refused to let my past define my future. I stopped waiting for someone else to validate my worth. I completed my doctorate in biomedical toxicology at the University of Washington, graduating at the top of my class. I took control of my financial destiny, launching an independent research lab dedicated to developing affordable antidotes for rare neurotoxins. I took care of my mind and body. I took full responsibility for my own happiness. A month ago, I visited Federal Supermax Prison in Oregon. I sat behind a clear glass partition, looking at my father, Arthur Ross. He wore a faded orange jumpsuit. His hair was stark white, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling. He tried to speak, to offer old excuses, to blame the world for his downfall. I held up a hand and stopped him softly. "I am not here to yell at you, Arthur," I said, my voice calm, steady, and free of anger. "I am not here as your victim anymore. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." I walked out of that prison into the bright sunlight, leaving his toxic shadow behind forever. I felt lighter than air. "Mom!" A cheerful shout broke through my thoughts. I turned around and smiled. Leo and Tobias came running across the green lawn, their laughter echoing through the fresh coastal air. They wore matching light linen shirts and beige shorts, their skin tanned from a summer spent playing outdoors. They had grown taller, stronger, and full of vibrant energy. Behind them walked Damien, dressed in a casual, white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He moved with a smooth, effortless stride, his legs fully healed, his gray eyes shining with warmth. Damien walked up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist. He pulled me against his chest. The familiar, comforting scent of cedarwood and sea salt enveloped me like a warm blanket. He rested his chin softly on my shoulder, looking out at the endless blue horizon. "What are you thinking about, Dr. Ross?" Damien whispered softly in my ear, his voice rich and deep. "I am thinking about how beautiful it is when you stop looking back," I replied, turning my head to kiss his cheek. The twin boys darted up onto the deck, sliding across the polished wood. Tobias held a small digital tablet behind his back, a mischievous spark dancing in his hazel eyes. Leo stood beside him, trying very hard to suppress a wide grin. "Dad, Mom, we have an official announcement to make," Tobias declared, puffing out his chest with mock formality. Damien raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "An announcement? Did you, too, break another vase in the living room?" "No," Leo giggled, kicking Tobias's sneaker. "Tell them, Toby." Tobias tapped the screen of the tablet and turned it toward us. We ran a secret analytical scan on Mom's latest medical report from the clinic this morning. As junior detectives, we confirmed the diagnostic data. And I asked, laughing as I looked at my two brilliant boys. Leo jumped up and down, clapping his hands. "We are getting a baby sister. The report says it's a girl." Damien froze for a fraction of a second. His breath caught in his throat. He looked down at me, his gray eyes widening with pure, unadulterated joy. He looked at my stomach, then back up at my face. Tears of happiness shimmered in his eyes. He lifted me off my feet, spinning me around in the golden light as the boys cheered and danced around our legs. When he set me down, he leaned down and pressed his lips to mine in a long, tender kiss that tasted of ocean air and sweet promise. The sun dipped lower toward the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of amber, violet, and deep gold. The golden hour had arrived. I stood beside Damien, holding his hand tightly, while Leo and Tobias sat on the wooden steps, pointing at a pod of dolphins leaping through the sparkling waves. The cool sea breeze kissed my skin. The scent of wild sage filled the air. My heart was light, free, and unburdened. I did not hate the past anymore. It was just the rocky road that brought me to this exact moment. I stood under the open sky, free, proud, and deeply in love with the life I had built with my own hands. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below so we know we're walking this journey together. Hope to see you on the next page.